What's up, everybody? Welcome back to Actuali Podcast. We are live on YouTube, Twitch, and Facebook. Thank you all for joining us.
Hey.
I'm Chris. This is Mr. DJ.
Mr. DJ.
We also moonlight as a rock band, American Dharma. We got some shows coming up. If you guys are in the Baltimore area on February 10th, we're going to be at Zen West. And on February 11th, we're actually going to be at Unit 6, which is at Seven Moons Wellness Shop in Hedgesville, West Virginia. So look those shows up. Look up our band, American Dharma, online. We're everywhere. You can listen to our music on Spotify and all those places. And we're on Facebook and Instagram and YouTube as well. We'd love to have you guys join us. So in our last episode...
Talked about Proche and Prochiron.
Yeah, we did.
And Proche is paying attention to the process, seeing the difference between the meaning and the event.
Yes.
So something happens, and then you have a meaning response to it, and understanding the difference between the two, and not, confusing them. Fusing them together in a conflictatory manner, even though they are fused together in a way, because, you get the meaning only after the event, right?
True that.
But you can't change the event. You can only change the meaning you get out of it.
That's right. We can actually recognize our interpretation of an event that's going on inside of our minds, attaching meaning to something that the event actually doesn't have intrinsically itself.
And so the I guess it's prosoche. You'll have to forgive me. My spelling is bad on here and in shorthand.
Prosoche.
Thank you. The core is at the core of our modern psychotherapies. And I have a little sayingism here. The core of wisdom is knowing what is in your control and what is not, and quit pretending that things are in your control that are not.
That's truth.
Yeah.
This is it.
So when it comes to controlling things, that's the having mode. When you want to control things, that's in the having mode opposed to the being mode.
Yes.
So it goes back to the having mode, being mode that we discussed episodes ago, and it keeps popping up. I got a note here. Many needs are met by enhancing meaning, and enhancing the agent-arena relationship. Maturity is a meaning-making or agent-arena relationship. So we're maturing into this. And do not confuse... Let's see, it says, do not confuse the two, because you cannot control a world that is beyond your control, essentially. So knowing what you can control and what you can't control.
That's the core of wisdom right there.
Yeah.
So with Prososh, we learn how to pay attention to how we pay attention. We learn how to pay attention to how we judge. We learn that there's a difference between the meanings that we apply to events and the events themselves.
Yeah.
This is a core aspect of our modern psychological understanding of the mind.
And our therapies, most specifically, how we, when something happens to people, like say, you're doing like trauma or grief therapies and stuff, you're not having them work over like, oh, what happened, and oh, what happened, and what happened. And we know from, when you get in that state with your friends, oh no, what happened? It doesn't do anything. It's, well, what can you do about it? Well, much less than you can do about the meaning you're making out of it.
It's almost in the expressing of it to somebody else that you start to see it from almost an outside perspective. And that's what helps in the therapy so much.
And we use, and then we move on to Prochiron, which means ready to hand or ready at hand, like and remembering in the sati sense. The
realization that we have at hand.
And the book Meditations by Marcus Aurelius is not like a belief-making book. It's not any of that. It's him using a self-reflective practice on himself.
Right. Yes. Yeah. It was like his diary, in a sense. Yeah. I mean, it's very personal.
And it was a tool for him to work out his own things. And so he has a saying here, it is possible to be happy even in a palace. Because, Marcus Aurelius didn't have... I guess the ability to just say, screw it all, I'm going to go out with the people and do whatever like Prince Siddhartha did. Because he was just only a prince.
He was in a position of...
He had to...
He was already in a position of power. And he cared for the people.
And that was his responsibility to be this grand emperor of man.
Seems like one of those first people that realized in a really big way that we can. Oh, I totally lost myself there. Marcus, where are you at, brother? Marcus.
He's just trying to be happy in the palace.
Oh yeah,
man.
that the best leader is not the one who leads best, but the one who creates more leaders. That's it. Yeah.
So yeah, there's some practices we talked about. The first practice would be objective seeing, and not like third person objective, but seeing things as objects. So he mentioned like sex. It's just friction that creates sticky fluids, and that removes the meaning from an event, and it's just the objects within the event.
It's a good way of elucidating how much events we co-identify with this world constantly, and this is a useful trait. But we can also BS ourselves.
Yes,
and so we can sometimes attach a meaning to an event that isn't accurate or isn't useful for us psychologically. And like you were saying there, we can look at something like sex from a having mode perspective rather than a being mode perspective, where you're creating something together, you're making love.
And that's where we get into, what is it, premeditatio. So the example for that is when you kiss your child goodnight, think I could lose them to death, which separates the meaning from the event. The event of death didn't happen, but what does this say child mean to you? What does this relationship mean to you? What is the meaning of it?
Oh, yeah.
So you're going from one opposite to the other. You're removing all meaning, and then you're removing all the event and just having the meaning.
Yes.
And then so rom-coms.
That's a powerful question to ask oneself when you're kissing your child goodnight. Realize that they could die.
Yeah, and I mentioned that the lullaby. The as they lay me down to sleep, I pray the Lord my soul to keep. If I die before I awake, I pray the Lord my soul to take. That's
Yes.
That's that end, and it's just encoded in nursery rhymes and lullabies and things. Actually,
so very much here we're trying to learn to pull apart meaning in events to recalibrate our sense of meaning, and that's where wisdom comes in. It's about realizing what is in our control and what's not, like you said earlier there. So we can pursue love by having sex, maturity by owning stuff. This doesn't stabilize meaning. And we often do set our hearts on things that we can't even control.
Putting makeup on a pig does not make it a good date, So he talked about rom-coms, romantic comedies, and I thought this is great. And they're total bullshit, because they teach us that nature cares and is trying to bring people together, and nature's looking out for you, and the whole situation's set up so these two people can come together, and it's like, it's bullshit. Nature doesn't care.
Right.
You could have
just play with that.
You could have just gotten married, and then you step out in front of a bus and plastered. Nature didn't care.
Yeah, right.
It's not crying for you. It's not rooting for you. It's just is. And so
that narrative meaning that we're assigning there is not accurate.
Yeah. So we get into the Stoics, which when we talked about anxiety, well, not last episode, but the episode of that, the anxiety of mortality, the Stoics believed it wasn't mortality that you're having an anxiety of. It's fatality. in the sense of fate, and the ultimate fate is to die. That's why we call it a fatality.
Yes, death is when we come apart. Death is fatal. It's the ultimate loss of agency. That's actually what we fear, not the mortality, because we're not afraid of the time before we existed. It's once we have existed that we want to continue feeling this deep meaning, and so we're afraid of losing that loss of control, agency.
Yeah. So death is where the event and meaning become unglued. It's when it separates. Well, quite literally, because you die, and then when other people die, it's just like, damn, you have this breakdown of meaning in the event, and that's probably one of the main driving factors for the recursive loops of guilt that we go through. We call them survivors or whatever, and it takes a while, and then you have the different modes of grief you have to go through to re-glue the meaning in an event, but in a healthy way that helps you move past it. Hopefully. That's
I like it. So at this part, this is where he teaches us about how we can take a view from above.
The third practice, the view from above, higher viewing, ever
view
expanding.
the situation within within which one is enmeshed, and then take a back step, like you're looking with a telescopic view, and you can situate the event then in a new way, and you can situate any event, like right now, like you think of yourself as in a room. Well, think of yourself and the situation you're in as if it were happening not just in your room, but in your whole neighborhood, then your whole state, and then your whole nation, your whole world, then the cosmos as a whole.
Yeah.
And it totally transforms your impression of the moment when we do that. So whenever I'm going through something heavy, or I'm seeing really heavy stuff go on in the water world, it helps me to take that telescopic view and remember, oh, that's right, we're just these crazy animate beings outgrowing from this planet that somehow became self-reflective, and we're like dust motes within a dust mote.
Oh, well, and that can bring a certain amount of nihilism too.
That can bring a sense. Well, that for me,
know,
it brings a great sense of wonder, but I know it can give people a sense of the great emptiness and
well, and if
meaninglessness.
you're lacking the first practice and the second practice naturally, then you're just like, well, if we're all gonna die and we're just this tiny speck in the universe and we'll probably never meet any other life, and I'm only here for 100 years out of billions of years, I'm insignificant. I believe in nothing.
Yeah, I don't think about it in terms of size. I think about it in terms of the scope of what we're already a part of.
Yeah.
Like we are in the midst of a miracle, and nobody knows how it came to be, but we get to weave a story together here. Yeah. And
that's the whole.
What a wonder
that's the holding on to meaning. Opposed to the other end, where if you took this just looking out practice only by itself.
Well, it helps me not take myself so seriously, and other people's ideas and judgments not so seriously. I recognize, oh, that's right. We're in the midst of a story here, in the midst of an evolution. Humans aren't supposed to be perfect angels yet. Yeah.
And that's where this next practice comes in, is the internalizing of Socrates, the talking to yourself, but not in the rumination.
There you go.
Kind of talking to yourself, but the basically bullshit proofing yourself and being able to work it through, continuing to ask why until you find yourself bullshitting yourself, and then you go, okay, well, there it is.
There it is. Yes, because what matters the most is our capacity for transformation, and we gain more flexibility when we are taking part in these transformative practices, bringing into awareness the meaning-making process and the distinct perspectives that we bring to them, that we bring to the process. So internalizing Socrates, and do with oneself what Socrates tried to do with people, is basically what you're doing when you internalize them, not to ruminate or think fatalistically, but just to go through the process that Socrates would go through with people.
And he gave a really good example of this too. So like, say if you're like counseling somebody and the person's like, well, everybody hates me, and it's just like, okay, well, does everybody hate you? I'm sure your cat likes you, and you're like, okay, well, not everybody hates me, but this person and this person hate me, and this. So the note I have here is, this may be what you believe. You may believe everybody hates you.
You can see the fatalism there.
But what do you mean by everybody hates you?
Yes.
So, there's a difference between what you believe and what you mean. And it's amazing how often you catch yourself saying something you believe that you don't actually mean. Like, and I don't mean that in a sense of like, lying about your beliefs. I mean, it's like, well, you definitely believe that everybody's coming down on you and whatever, but that's not what you mean.
Is everything really falling apart? So we're saying everything because we're trying to express, we're providing a little bit of exaggeration to provide some oomph to what we're saying, because we're trying to depict the emotional weight of it. We're feeling something deeply and emotionally. It's really palpable and powerful for us. So we'll say things like, everything is falling apart, to give a sense of that emotionality behind it. But it is a very fatalistic way of thinking when we're doing that. So using that inner Socratic method on oneself, like you were saying, look at the word everything, or everyone. And
then, so I guess the issue we have when we get trapped into this, the whole like everybody hates me thing, is your emotions and arousals are ahead of the meaning. So you have an emotional aroused response to an event that happens before you can generate meaning for it. And I think it's important to be able to sidestep yourself so you don't get into the parasitic processing aspect of it and keep looping down, so then maybe the view from above would be a very useful technique to pull yourself out of the emotional arousal. And then once you're out there, then you can self-Socratize And if
Yes.
you've been in the practice of looking at things as their components while simultaneously also looking at the meaning of things, might, protect you a little bit from the ebbs and flows of a chaotic universe that ultimately does
Yeah, 'cause
does
we beat
not
ourselves
care.
up.
Like, I think, I believe in God. I believe God does care, but in a more of like, you're going to fly or die.
Yeah, he's
And
given
it
us
has
free
to be
will.
that way.
There's
So,
many rewards for living
Yeah.
in concert with reality, but there's also heavy downsides that are there to kind of put us back on track, really. So, yeah, so we're looking at life from the perspective of, if we had immortality, for instance, what would we really get out of it?
yeah. And that's where he starts to introduce the concept of a
Because we're not looking for
fullness, a
Yeah,
broadness,
we're looking
opposed
for
to a
depth.
length of,
Yeah, we're looking for a depth of life,
And that's
a
what-
fullness of life.
That's
Yes.
what Bilbo Baggins was getting at when he was, saying that, he feels like too much, not enough butter spread across too much bread or whatever the thing was.
Yes.
He's lived a very long time and he's starting to thin out, and the
Mm-hmm.
celebrations after his journey are no longer fulfilling. So he
Yeah.
has to go hang with the elves to, gain the wisdom of how to die properly,
Mm-hmm.
essentially. That's what I get out of, that whole thing. J.R.R. Tolkien was a fascinating fellow.
Really?
Yep.
Really. So we can realize that we can have more control over the meaning that we apply to things, and that it's not a length of time that we're looking for so much as the depth of being,
Mm-hmm.
a depth of experience,
Yep.
and of course, being able to practice ways of cultivating that being mode that we have capacity
Yes.
to live through. That seems to be the way for us. So we practice prochiron and prokairos. I believe he said the inward and outward aspects of this movement. And we're going to learn now about the genius of Christianity and expressing the kairos that Christ represents.
Yeah, so we're moving from the Eastern traditions now into the Western traditions in an age that reverted back to a pre-axial age. Mm-hmm. And we are now being introduced to this concept of...
Of kairos, the fullness of time, the right timing.
oh, yes, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. A little bit prior to that, he reminds us awakening experiences help us lose our fear of our mortality and our fear of, or in our attachment to existential reality. So the fullness of being allows these existential issues and distress over our mortality to kind of heal themselves.
Yeah.
The fullness of being is the answer to the existential crises that we're experiencing, that we're trying to fulfill through our having needs. So we think that we can eat a bunch of food or have sex or distract ourselves with, our phones and computers and TV.
I guess
and
at
all
that
that
point we're being anti-kairos.
So this is all having mode that we're trying to fill this void with, but what we really need is being mode activity, which is creativity, which is love.
And being at the right time too. And that's the word kairos is an agent of change at the right time. And so the story of Jesus is the story of the ultimate, I think it's kairos,
yes,
not
the right
kairos,
timing, because
but
there's like a fullness of time that has built up. And then he comes through as an actual anthropomorphized representation of kairos, which is a really trippy concept. And the way Vervaeke breaks this down is beautiful. And this past episode that we're reviewing now and in the one that we're about to watch together.
And he introduces us to the word logos as well. So it's logos, which is, you could call it the word of God, but it's not just the words, but also the underlying structural rules and qualities within it that make things happen. And then through that is the birth of the kairos at this period of time that we call Jesus.
Yes.
And then Jesus introduces us to this concept of agape love, the love that you would have for your child.
That's a good way of giving us an example that it's a selfless kind of love that is just given naturally and freely prior to anything being done for you.
For the sake
of loving.
For the sake of making a person out of something.
That's the outcome. Is that this actually will turn somebody into a whole person.
Yeah.
This kind of love.
And when you see that stories a lot too, like movies about, you have a prisoner that's reformed or something else like that because
example.
somebody, or like a rough and tough kid, but somebody had that just appreciative love.
We love those stories of
unconditionals.
people that overcome after a serious crisis, or they were even if they were like a POS and they were just doing horribly in life and not even treating other people well, we love to see that person come around
and become a true person.
And
usually
we love
you have
that
like
story.
a mentor.
Yeah.
You'd have
Right.
like a mentor figure that would express this agape love towards
Yes.
this unperson to
Yes.
help them make a person of themselves.
Right. Yeah. I was thinking it could be a wise mentor character, a wise father or mother character. So we're going to be moving into ancient Israel now and learning about Jesus and the axial age, how the prophets are bringing us back on track with the idea of making the future and co-creating with God. And Christianity proposes that God's creative logos, the word he speaks to prompt, to make existence, also creates the kairos out of that intelligible substratum.
Yeah, and I really like that idea of kairos, the agent of change at the right moment. And I think Christianity is Christ is trying to show that you can be that agent of change at the right moment if you open yourself to it.
Yes, that's exactly it. Yeah, because Vervaeke was telling us last episode, God's capacity for producing kairos through logos is now being incarnated into a person. So this is the ultimate turning point. This is the genius of Christianity, is that they found a way to personify this ideal. Jesus is basically saying, you too can experience kairos, metanoia. You too can be born again.
Yeah, the metanoia, I don't have the last sheets, but so, yeah, metanoia.
It's awakening, noticing, it's
the
beyond noticing, it's like the totality of knowing.
Yeah.
So it's like we can radically transform. Of course, love in our modern use of the word has been completely trivialized.
Yeah.
And we think of love as an emotion, and we've spoken on this before. Love is not an emotion. It encompasses so many emotions. You can be angry and jealous and envious, and you can be blissful and many beautiful things as well in the experience of love. But love itself, we find, then being not an emotion, it's a mode of being. It's an actual existential mode. It's the answer to the meaning crisis, but it's got to be a very wisely inculcated and developed love. It's an agape love. It's a selfless love. It's an unconditional love, but it's very deeply understanding from that place of unconditionality.
And perhaps it takes a bit of emotional discipline as well, because love as a state of being does have a lot of emotional impacts and emotional chances for heavy emotions within it. And if you're not disciplined enough, then you get thrown in the wind like a sailor that doesn't know how to pull his sails down when things get a little too because like you can be super agape loving towards people and still just be broken over and over and over and over and over and over by the evils and the worst things that happen to people. I can tell you I am. It's like it kills me to watch.
The answer is always agape love. It's basically it's taking us out of that frame when we're starting to be overcome by people's inconsistencies. And the answer to that, again, is agape love. It's an unconditionality. It's basically saying, oh, that person's got issues too. They're still growing,
And sometimes, like say if
I don't need love to be happy. I can give love because that's what love is really meant for. Agape, in particular, is a love that is just freely given with no reason.
Well, say like you have like a parent that loves their child in this sense, in the agape sense, and the child gets to a certain age where no longer can the parent, or does the parent have the responsibility to make decisions for the child? We call this like adulthood. So part of that love at a certain point will get to knowing, well, there's nothing I can do. And if I try to, then I'm going to destroy the very thing I try to make a person out of. You'll devour your child, if you will, if you don't let them out into the chaos and craziness of the world. If you don't sacrifice them to the world. Because what's the most sacred thing to most people? Their children. What do you sacrifice? The most sacred thing.
Yeah.
And what do? You do it to the world. Hopefully not on altars and all that crazy stuff. We're past that. What was it?
Yeah, fortunately, we've made it past that.
Well, we got a story about that. What is it? Abraham,
Oh, sure.
They're going to take out his kid, and God's like, no, not what I meant. Hold on.
Well, he waits to make sure to see if he's really going to do it.
Yeah. It's like, okay.
Before he says, okay, you don't have to do it.
No, actually release your child out into the world to make kingdoms.
There's a deep lesson in there. It's that you must be willing to have pure love for existence without any reservations, without any doubts, without any fears. It must be complete faith, as in faithfulness, living
Yeah.
up to being a loving, truly honorable person to everyone and everything around you. And so the ultimate test then is to be like, okay, well, will you kill your child for this ordeal? What a crazy test to put someone against, but it's a moral fable. It's telling us something.
Yeah, yeah. It's I don't really necessarily think, if there was this person, Abraham.
He never meant for him to.
Yeah, like I think.
I don't think that God really intended for him to kill his child.
The Bible is a large book of hyperlinked poems.
Right.
And poems aren't meant to be taken literally, and if you do take them literally, you're not enjoying poetry for what it really is. Poetry is deeply encoded messages that you can't directly, or you could directly state but wouldn't stick.
Right.
So you put them in a poem.
You have to be willing to let everything go,
Yeah.
including your attachments.
Mm-hmm.
You got to be willing to be a completely committed person to truth and goodness and the ideals that God stands for in that scripture. So it is a total giving oneself over to something that is being asked for in that story of sacrifice. And when you realize it's okay, you're willing to truly love fully, completely everything and everyone without preference, then okay, you've passed the test.
Yeah. And we seem to see the same stories told in different ways as we psychologically and spiritually evolve as creatures too. Now we're still telling the same stories. Like the best movies that you really like are a story, pretty much a story that's been told over and over and over and over and over and over and over again. But as we develop, we gain different insights differently according to different, circumstance within the movie. Like when we watch a movie about the 1960s, that's automatically different. Like now, that's automatically different than people that were in the 1960s watching a movie about their current year.
Oh, right, yeah.
Or you can look at it like, that people in the 1960s writing a sci-fi flick about 2001 or, something like that. And, so it's depending on where you're at, the stories change a little bit, but the deep core meaning of them don't. And the basic patterns of them really don't.
Right.
Same thing with music. You get your verse, chorus, bridge, verse, chorus, outro. That's a lot of songs, but it's amazing how many can still surprise you within there with the same
that framework,
same format, but just slight changes here or there. Humans were interesting. We can listen to the same thing over and over and over again and gain new insights.
Yeah. No, there's so much room for creativity in that framework.
Yeah.
It's surprising that there's like infinite room for creativity in that framework. There's ways that you can chop off one part early here and then come in with a little change.
Add a double
here.
chorus before the bridge,
Yeah. And then even beyond that, it's just like the notes that you're playing, the chords that you're playing, the durations, the amount of space between, and the way that the melody weaves throughout, and different ways the percussion is playing. And then it all comes down to the actual emotionality and the intensity of the playing, the dynamics of how the thing is being played, the timbre of the voices and the instruments that are being utilized. And so there is so much room to be original still within the frameworks.
Actually, it helps to have these frameworks because there's infinite options and like
choice exhaustion.
Yeah,
get lost.
That's the bane of a lot of new songwriters, if you will. It's like it's either I can't write any parts, or it's I got all these parts, but I don't know what to do with them. There's just so much to do, and I don't know where to start with all this.
Kind of got to go through that process.
Yeah,
because you got to be wide open, creative, trying everything.
Well, that's why you got
to do something new and novel.
And you always got to work with people who like, and not just music, but in anything, work with people that are a lot better than you, a little bit better than you, and then worse than you. The people that are worse than you, so you can be the teacher and realize where your flaws are, because if you mess up, they mess up.
And you learn more deeply about whatever you're teaching as well. Yeah.
Whereas working with people that are just above you help pull you into the flow state, and then working with people that are way above you give you this aspirational goal.
Oh, good.
And you can't understand everything they're trying to tell you, but eventually as you go, it'll start making more sense until you're there.
Yeah.
In the process.
That's cool. I like how you put that. All right, guys.
I think that's
a pretty good summation. Yeah, we're going to jump on into it now.
Episode 16, Awakening from the Meaning Crisis, Christianity and Agape.
Welcome back to Awakening from the Meaning Crisis. So last time we had begun to take a look at the transformation that was occurring in the Eastern Mediterranean around the time of the advent of what was going to become Christianity. Now, of course, this figures upon the person of Jesus of Nazareth, a very controversial figure to say the least. And as I said, I'm not going to endeavor to claim to give the absolute or exhaustive account of this extraordinary individual, but instead I'm going to try and do what I've done before, which is to show how what he did contributed to our understanding of meaning and wisdom, and how that eventually pushed the history that has led to the meaning crisis forward. So we were talking about one of the core messages of Jesus. Jesus seems to have understood himself, or at least those around him, understood him as kairos. If you remember, that's a turning point in the course of history, because as we spoke before, the Israelites, and by this time they were known as the Jews, had developed the psychotechnology of understanding history as a cosmic narrative, in which there are crucial turning points, and Jesus saw himself as such a kairos. Whether or not he saw himself as the kairos that was known as the Jewish Messiah is again controversial. I don't need that for the purposes of my argument. It seems, though, that he had a sense of himself as deeply participating in the way in which God was directing and involving himself in the course of history. If you remember the model of God we talked about when we talked about the ancient Israelite, the God of the Exodus is a God who is creating into an open future, and that human beings participate in that creation by identifying with a particular course, da'ath, loving it, being shaped by it, as well as shaping, participating in its flow. And Jesus of Nazareth saw himself as having an especially deep participation, such that he felt himself to be at one with this God who is capable of altering the course of history and redeeming human beings. He seems to have understood this, kairos, as having something to do with a profound way of understanding the participation in God, which we've talked about before, makes sense. We've talked about how this participatory knowing is a process in which you're coupled, right? You're neither making it or being made by it, but it's this reciprocal revelation in which you are making it and it is making you. The way you participate in your culture, the way you participate in your language, the way you participate in history. And you know this not by gathering beliefs, but the way in which yourself is fundamentally transformed. And so Jesus understood this participation, his participation in God as the disclosing of this profound kind of love. And we began talking about this, the kinds of love that human beings experience, and how love is something that deeply transforms who we are and our salience landscape, our character. We talked about the Greeks have three terms, and it's helpful because by this time the New Testament is being written in Greek. It's helpful to understand these Greek terms. So there's eros, which is the love of being one with something, right? And it can be just, drinking water, so I become one with it. But of course it could become what has become more commonly known as becoming one with someone through sexual union, erotic love. Then there's philia, that's at the core of philosophia. This is the love that is born out of, cooperation. So eros is consumptive, making one with. Philia is cooperation. We work together. And a lot of how we succeed as human beings is the way we work together. But Jesus starts to emphasize a new kind of love, agape. And this is not the love of consumption or cooperation. This is the love of creation. It's the love that God is demonstrating towards humanity in the way God is an ongoing creation of the open future. So God is creating the future. He's creating the historical process and course of that history that makes people possible. See, agape is the kind of love that creates persons. So the main metaphor for agape, if you remember, is the way a parent loves a child. You don't love a child because you want to consume it in some way. That's hideous and vicious. You don't love your child when you bring it home from the hospital because it's a great friend to you, it can cooperate. It can't do that at all. In fact, it's not even a person. It's not a morally, rationally reflective agent. In fact, it's exactly the opposite. You love it precisely because by loving that non-person, you turn it into a person. This is the powerful, creative, it's a godlike ability that we have. By participating through love in another being, we can transform that being from a non-person into a person. A person that could enter into a community of persons and find meaning, fellowship, belonging. So that radical transformative power of agape, its ability to radically transform us and reorient us, brings about a metanoia, a radical turning. This means above and beyond, and this means your salience landscaping, how you are fundamentally, perspectively knowing the world. So metanoia, I'm fundamentally turning, altering my whole field of consciousness, altering my whole orientation. And what's fundamentally happening in the metanoia, right, of agape is I'm having a personal kairos. My personal course is being radically transformed. So Jesus is not only teaching this, he is exemplifying it. He experiences himself as a kairos, and he's giving to people through agape the possibility of experiencing their own personal kairos. See, what happens in the experience that Jesus is pointing to, I believe, is we get a fundamental reorientation. For a very long time, we are born out of, we are the receivers of agape. It is only because you as an animal, because that's what you are before you're a person, a biological animal, it's only because you as an animal received the agapic love of others that you were actually transformed into a person. And what you actually do, right, is you internalize other people and how they are aware of you. And that is how you gain your reflective rationality. That is how you gain your own understanding. You fundamentally gain your self-understanding, your sense of self, and your ability to reflect on yourself by how you are reflected through other people. It's a fundamental thing to say, and because it is so fundamental and we can say it with few words, it can be trivialized. But we are, in a very deep sense, born out of an agapic love that precedes us. It's because of agape, because of the way other people have devoted themselves and participated in you, that you went from a non-person into a person, that you got the ability, it's almost like other people are mirrors through which you come to see and realize yourself, that you got a sense of self, that you got the ability to reflect on yourself, that you got a sense of your own ownership. There's nothing that in fact is more transformative for an adult than having a child. So from the child's perspective, what's happening is, right, they are, in a sense, consuming the love that the adult is giving them. They're taking in this love and they are becoming one with it. You understand yourself and can reflect on yourself because of the way you have internalized other people's attention on you. But that's the child's perspective. So you can see for the child it's very egocentric. And Freud picked up on this, but I think he also twisted it. In this sense, it's our relationship to our parents, and please listen to this very carefully, is in that sense erotic, right? In the sense that we are consuming them. We are internalizing them. We are becoming one with them. Now, I don't mean erotic in the sense that Freud ultimately meant, because Freud thought that all of that was always a sexual experience. I think that's too simplistic. But I think there is insight here. But take a look at this from the parent's perspective. From the parent's perspective, the person giving agape, it is not egocentric at all. In fact, there is nothing that will more challenge your egocentric orientation, that everything is moving this way, than having a child. If you're a good parent, and of course we all vary in how good we are as parents. I have been privileged to be a parent myself. But what happens is you are no longer the center of your salience landscape. The child is. Because the child is absolutely dependent upon you. Do you see? This is the metanoia of agape. I mean, the metaphor is turning, but the problem with that metaphor is all turning is still egocentric. You have to think of the turning this way. The turning is I go from being egocentric to being centered on someone else. And what I'm actually centered on is I'm centered on the process, right, of creating a person, like God, but not egocentrically, like I'm a God. It's like I am participating in that agapic process that made me. The agape that precedes me flows through me and transforms me as I'm oriented. And what Jesus was offering, I believe, was he was offering a teaching so that all people could experience this, not just individually, personally, with their own parents, but in terms of a relationship to God. We could all experience this fundamental turning such that we become vessels through which agape creates other human beings. So what's going to happen, of course, and you see this in the epistles of John, is the Christian community starts to understand this capacity for radically transforming people so that they become conduits of this God-like creative process whereby non-persons are turned into persons. They're coming to understand agape itself is God. That's what God is. This is so the Israelite notion of God creating the open history becomes, right, it becomes specified in the teachings of Jesus to the idea that, no, God is agape. God is this process that we participate in. And look, it made you. You didn't make it. You participate in agape. It precedes you, it flows through you, and you participate in it insofar as you help other people to come to personhood through you. Now, this is a radical idea. As I mentioned last time, this is going to give the Christians a psychotechnology, a grammar for how to transform perspectival and participatory knowing that is going to allow them to conquer the Roman Empire. I don't mean militarily, of course. What I mean is, what Christians can do is they can offer all the non-persons of the empire a process by which they become persons within a community of persons, enmeshed together in agapic love. So all the women, all the widows, all the sick, all the poor, all the non-male Roman citizens, all the weak, can come to Christianity and receive the opportunity and the community that supports this opportunity of a radical transformation. Now, we know that the community around, there's many different communities around Jesus, I should say. There's, just like around Socrates, there's many different Jesus movements. But this seems to be the key idea. And it seems that it carries with it some kind of notion of a sacrificial element to it. And again, there's a lot of controversy around this, and we have to be careful not to read too much of Paul into this. But we'll talk about Paul in a few minutes. But agape has a sacrificial element to it in that you give yourself, you forgive, you give before the person earns. It's not philia. It is not reciprocity. It is not you and I are working together. You have earned my trust and love. Philia is great and it's important, right? And it's not eros. I love you because of how I can consume you and, right, make you one with me. No, agape has a sacrificial component to it because what I'm actually doing, right, is I'm giving up. I'm making myself an affordance for your transformation from non-person into person. So this is why Jesus emphasizes forgiveness as central to his message, right? And one of the things we should remember, and this is controversial to say, is Jesus does not anywhere in the Gospels present himself, right, as the means by which, right, we obtain forgiveness from God. He often presents himself as a way and things like that, and we'll talk about that. But when asked how to obtain forgiveness from God, this opportunity of radically transforming ourselves, Jesus' consistent message is by forgiving other people. We experience agape from God, the degree to which we give it to others. And this has been, of course, radically trivialized in our culture, right? We think of forgiveness largely as a matter of, somebody feels sorry and we tell them it's okay. That's not the core idea of forgiveness. The core idea of forgiveness doesn't depend on your contrition. The degree to which you are trying to afford someone else growing into their personhood, and the degree to which you are making a sacrifice towards that, is already forgiveness. Some forgiveness is when somebody has slighted us and the relationship has been damaged, and we have to act agapically in order to reestablish the relationship. But in a very real sense, all agapic love is forgiving love because it is giving before, right, the person that is receiving the love can in any way be said to have earned it. So this idea that we are sacrificially extending the capacity for individuals to redirect their own history, experience their own kairos, was often captured by Jesus in famous language of being born again. You're dying and you're being born again. This radical transformation of your entire orientation, your entire way of being. Now,
Nah.
Beep, 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 beep.
All right, so now we're getting deep into agape. This is so cool. I love the way that he breaks this down. So God, this idea of agape is like God is creating into an open future through this expression that, well, through like da'ath, the idea that we can be shaped by loving in a participatory way. And through this loving and participation in the flow of God's love, we can know God. The reciprocal realization occurs, and we participate in the same way that we participate in culture and language.
Yep. Yeah, what I have written here is, agape, like defining agape is the love of creation, the creating of people through the interactions with other people. So, the child consumes the love of the adult and becomes this person through the agape love of the adult that
Internalizes, becomes one with.
Yeah, and in the sense of eros, in the sense of consuming, not how Freud thought, sexual,
like internalizing.
But it's still an egocentric position, and then
that's where a child comes
sure.
from.
Well, yeah, they don't learn that they're really a separate person.
No, they learn agape through us, though. Yeah, over time. But it's agape that we are giving to the child. That is a love that helps make people possible because it's a love that's available already before any needs have been met or anything, because it's not the filial love, it's not the eros kind of love.
And you can see this in kids. So like a kid really, I guess the point at which you can tell a kid that can realize it's separate from other selves and then look at that person's perspective is when they start sharing. Because when you put babies together, they play by themselves, and like they'll be in a room playing together, but they're playing.
There's that sacrificial love, though. If they're willing to give up their toy for another kid's happiness,
and to be able to see that. Well, that's the first reflection of going outside just the internal ego. I'm the only thing.
Yep.
Well, and then mom and dad are connected to that I because that's all they know, and so
they're mirroring the agape love that we've shown them. When they do that.
And so the parent's perspective, the parent is no longer the center of their own salience landscape. They are turning and going from the ego perspective of the child into this maturing adult perspective.
God's love is so it's the love of creation is a great way of summarizing the term agape. God's love and his creation is what made people possible, as you were saying. And then agape does indeed create persons through us. So we can enter into this in community, in a form of fellowship.
Sure.
And we can belong to this
movement.
And
we need others as well. Like I have his little quote written here: the agape that precedes me moves through me and onto others. So there needs to be others as well, and it's not necessarily just a reciprocal cycle, but something before you moving through you.
That's it. Yeah.
Into others, and then moving through them into others, and moving through, and then moving through and moving through.
It's always a reciprocal realization, but it does come from something before. So
and that's the
God into us, and then us into other people, and then we get into reciprocal relationship there.
I think that's this is a profound relationship with God, but this is also, I think, in Christianity where I won't say you become God as in like, you're
but
God.
You can't
I'm
know
God,
agape without God's love.
But you can become an agent of, say, God, and kairos in your own sense by continuing this process.
And Jesus understood this participation as a disclosure of the right kind of love, and we can experience that radical knowing through this, and a fundamental reorganization of ourselves, just as Jesus realizing his own kairos then helps humans go from just being animalistic to beings receiving this agapic unconditional love that we internalize, and this helps us gain rationality and a sense of self-understanding, and through that we're affected and realized by other people and with other people. And because other people have mirrored ourselves with love, we gain self-understanding as well. That's how we got our understanding of agape in the first place, like we were saying.
Yeah. And so I like what he said there. Everyone in the empire can become persons.
The widow, the orphan, the poor people, the sick, the
personing
weak.
People through Christ. So when, like, I take it when they say accept Christ into your heart, it's not this little dude in your heart. It's this aspect of personing,
It's this orientation.
you know,
Yeah.
and
It's this
personing
willingness
everybody,
to forgive.
the highest and the lowest.
Mm-hmm.
You know, not just, you know, oh, people that are just within my group are going to do this with it. No, it's everybody and your interactions with everybody.
Yeah.
Like, you know, just being Christ-like in the church does nothing. You have to be Christ-like in your life to have this true agapic experience.
Yeah. Realization. Yeah. We can understand others without reflecting on how they have understood us as we're forming, again, from children. So we're internalizing as children to become one with, to not in a sexual way. That's the too simplistic and understand, as Vervaeke says, but so that we can also live through this agapic love that our parents have given to us, that we realize innately as a gift. So giving agape is not an egocentric process at all for the parents.
They've forgiven us.
Right.
Before
we've even earned forgiveness.
And I like how he breaks down forgive, like for in the sense of like forefathers, or you know, before. It's been given before you and you're passing it through. So you could say that God is forgiveness. It's the thing that gives before everything else.
That's the sacrificial element.
Yeah.
Yep. It gives before anything is received. It gives without expectation. There's one part here that I wanted to note on. To be conduits of this godlike creative process is why we're practicing this agapic kind of love, this love that can flow through us and help transform ourselves and others. It's turning our egocentrism, and he says, not turning like in this way, but turning like this. So from turned in to turning out.
Going from downspin to upspin.
Literally like turning yourself inside out to the world.
Yeah.
I really like that, the way that he demonstrated that. So Christianity is like this new psychotechnology that humans came up with. All non-persons now have a process to become realized through agape, through Christ's love, through Christ's way as well.
And by affording someone else's transformation into personhood. And the way Jesus did this is he forgave people.
Before a person ever earned it, he just gave it. He gave it right off.
Gave it right before, and that was his way of expressing God to other people, is this ultimate forgiveness. So he's like, well, in order to further this process of agape through everybody, somebody's got to give the forgiveness before. So he'll be the person in flesh to do this.
Yeah.
You know,
this is why forgiveness is central to Christianity, because we experience agape from God by the degree to which we give it to others. That's almost a direct quote from Vervaeke there.
Agape is forgiving agape is for space giving love.
Yes. Sacrificing towards another person's growth into wholeness. All agape is forgiving before, sacrificially extending the capacity for individuals to experience their own kairos, their own capacity for rebirth in this moment.
Yeah, to be born again, to turn.
To be born again.
But I kind of want to talk about this. We were talking about for as in before, but we can also say, like, what is agape for? It's for giving love.
I like that.
It's for giving love.
Yeah, it is.
So it's literally before giving and also specifically for the giving of this love.
And if you just imagine yourself in this orientation when you're trying to deal with something frustrating or difficult, some kind of dispute maybe in a relationship, just put yourself into this kind of orientation, and you can see how differently things would play out if you were coming from this understanding, giving forgiveness before it's even earned or asked for or expected, just giving it outright from the beginning. You could see that there's a different tonality, that the words that we want to play off in our imaginary daydream scenario will change. Our whole way of approaching the situation will change. We'll be much more understanding. We'll be much less conditional, more unconditional. And we'll also understand like where we can be going wrong. We'll understand where their pain or the way that they're expressing a little bit, maybe too much anger or this or that is coming from, and we'll see it from a place of appreciation.
Interestingly enough, so it's like when Eros won't work to solve a problem, so when the coming together of two things won't solve the problem, and the working beside each other and with each other isn't enough. There's agape because you can just give it.
Yes. It's a
Because
very mature way of loving.
some people
Yeah.
like when they get mad, don't talk to me.
Right.
I don't want so they don't want the eros, they don't want the coming together, and then finally they talk, but then you're just talking past each other. That's the philia doesn't work because that relationship isn't working. They're talking past instead of with.
Yeah.
Well, the only thing to do at that point is like, what does your mom do when she's mad at you and you're a little butthead and you won't talk about things? She's just like, okay, well, dinner's at 6.
Yeah. So instead of giving up, just forgive. Just give before.
Yeah. It's like, I love you. I hate you. But I said I love you first. Gotcha.
You might even get a little smirk out of that if you say it with that much joviality.
Oh, yeah. The kid would just be like, baby, okay.
I was trying to say jovialty. I don't think that's a word. Joviality?
I think it's joviality or jovialness.
Jovialness?
I don't know. It's English.
By Jove. Jove would know.
Maybe
right, guys,
Bon Jovi knows.
I think that covers this section
Yeah.
pretty well. So let's go ahead. We'll jump back in now, guys.
The tragedy that befalls the Jesus movements, or at least some of them, because not all the movements care about this. This is, again, something that many people don't realize. There are many elements of the early followers of Jesus, communities that don't care about his death. They only care about his teaching. But, of course, Jesus does die, and that has a profound effect on some of these movements. And again, this is hard to state anything clearly or anything that we could have any great confidence in, but somehow his death exemplifies the sacrificial forgiveness that is at the core of God as agape. Somehow, Jesus' death enables people to internalize that sacrificial love and empowers them to transform other human beings. Now, there, of course, is resistance to the Jesus movement and to Jesus. It's plausible that his death was due to the fact that he was angering and upsetting a lot of people. We see this as as something similar to what confronted Socrates. One of the people that seems to have been an early persecutor is a guy by the name of Saul. Now, Saul's a very interesting person. He's both a Jew and a Roman citizen. At a time when these two groups of people are quite antagonistic towards each other, there had been already wars between the Romans and the Jews. A new one was about to come, two major Jewish revolts. So the relationship is a very tense one, filled with a lot of tension. And this is reflected within this person himself. He seems to have integrated these two disparate and warring aspects of his personality and his identity together around a commitment to law, organized rules of behavior and conduct. And he sees the Jesus movements, the followers of Jesus. They're not, in fact, just to point out something, they're not initially called the followers of Jesus. They're initially called the followers of the way, because Jesus had presented a way. See, the word way is so wonderful because it doesn't just mean method. It's not just some procedures. It's also an affordance of how you're going to move into the future. It is a new orientation. So Jesus is the way in which we can experience the kairos of metanoia and become forgiving individuals who are constantly forgiving agapically to others. Saul seems to see these people, right, and their language of agape and their adoration of Jesus as deeply threatening to his Jewish heritage and also to Roman order. And so he becomes involved in the persecution of the followers of the way. And it's about at the time that he's involved in the persecution that they start being called, actually as an insult, initially Christians, the followers of Christ, which means the anointed one. And so he's involved in persecuting them. He's there, the first time he's mentioned in the Bible, he's there when the first Christian is martyred, Stephen. Stephen is talking about this message, and the crowd gets angered, and they stone him, and Saul basically holds everybody's coats so that they can more effectively stone Stephen to death. So Saul becomes deeply involved in this, and he gets basically a writ, a letter, an official letter to travel to Damascus and round up these so-called Christians and bring them in for prosecution. And on the road, he has what I think we could call a transformative experience. He relates it himself in a couple places. It's also represented third person in the book of Acts, and there's differences in it, as there always is in something that has a mythological element to it. Again, where myth doesn't mean fable, where myth means trying to present a profound pattern. But he's struck by a bright light. And of course, this is the metaphor of enlightenment, and we know that transformative experiences often involve this experience of radical supersalience, often tremendous light, and he is struck to the ground by it. It's an overwhelming experience, and then a voice speaks to him and says, why, Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me? And Saul says, who are you, Lord? Lord isn't a title for God. Lord is anyone who has some important higher status than you. And the experience carries with it that ontonormativity that we talked about. Saul has the sense that he's confronting something more real than himself. Who are you? And the voice says, I am Jesus who you persecute. And that's all we need to talk about. I mean, Saul is blinded by this light and encountering this voice, right? And we can think about Plato's metaphor here of as we encounter these things, we're often blinded by the light. But what we need to understand is this engenders in Saul a deep, deep inner conflict. And in fact, when you read his biography, as I've already painted here, you can see that his experience of inner conflict is really profound. And this reminds us, again, it's analogous but different, of Plato's concern with inner conflict, the way inner conflict reveals the psyche. But whereas Plato is going to develop a scientific theory of inner conflict, Saul is going to undergo a transformative experience because of this inner conflict. It is going to riven him to his core, because how can it be that he has had this transformative experience, this awakening experience, this more real from the very being that he was persecuting? How can he reconcile these together? He travels to Antioch, and he actually gets taken in by the very people he was going to persecute. Do you see this? This is this forgiveness. The very people he was going to persecute take him in. So the people that he was going to destroy are actually responsible for his care. And under their care, his sight is restored. What's all this pointing to? Again, it's pointing to, right? He's at war with agape itself, and we all are. Like we all are. We have a very tough time, and this is part of the message of Jesus and John and Paul, at least to my mind. We have a tough time acknowledging the reality of agape. We like to create personal fables of how we are self-made and self-directed and self-secure and self-sustaining. And agape challenges that in a profound way.
Wow. Okay, good place to stop.
Yeah, before we go on to Saul going in the desert, because this is getting dense.
It is, man.
Man,
Oh
this
my gosh.
episode's going quick, too. We're already like the halfway point.
I
Man,
can't believe it.
yeah, time flies when you're having fun, right?
Yeah, I just had to check to see if it's the same amount of time as the episodes normally are, and it's 54 minutes. So it's right about there.
So
Wow. Okay.
I really like this statement. Jesus' death internalizes the sacrificial love into people, because no longer do they have someone else, so they have to internalize it and then give it to other people. That's the the calling of spreading.
That's what makes the story so powerful, and that's what actually ignited the movement and made the movement of Christianity so powerful, and actually was able to literally like take over Rome without fighting it in a war. This is insane. So that tragedy that befalls Jesus dying exemplifies that forgiveness.
Yeah.
And this enables people to internalize this notion of sacrificial love in an ultimate way, but it also super empowers them. This idea of how he makes himself a martyr for all of humanity, experiencing the most pain anyone can imagine anyone ever experiencing. The way they torture him is, if anyone has seen The Passion of the Christ, you got some idea of how intense that torture was, and that was actually quite toned down.
And it just wasn't the physical torture, but the actively trying to break somebody through shame. Because they couldn't guilt him because he wasn't breaching any internal laws, but they could shame him by stripping him naked and making him bear his cross down the street while people were throwing all kinds of horrible things on him.
Yeah.
And it still didn't break him.
It still didn't break him. So
he did have his moment of doubt,
instilled
though.
courage, though,
brief
didn't
moment
it?
of doubt. And this isn't.
He did have his moment of doubt, and that's what makes him human.
And he was able to bring. At least it says, he could have called all the angels of heaven to completely wipe humanity off the earth. They said he had that much power, but he chose, no, I'm not going to do that. I want people to be people and be the best people they possibly can be. And through this event, make profound meaning.
And isn't that a powerful instruction?
So I had a friend of mine.
You can create profound meaning in this world. You don't have to be nihilistic. You don't have to be world destroying. We all have the capacity to become like that.
Yeah.
We can have that intentionality in us. You don't have to do that, though. You can, once again, even forgive oneself. And Jesus, in a way, kind of had to forgive God. He had to give that forgiveness back that God had been giving him all along.
Forgive the one that is the ultimate forgiveness.
So why why have you forsaken me? God, why have you forsaken me?
Yeah. In particular, I don't think anywhere in the Bible Jesus stated I am this demigod, though I am the Son of God and Son of Man. It's not like, I know the thoughts of God, and obviously he didn't, because he's like, why did you forsaken me? Why do I have to go through this?
Yeah. Everyone takes things a little bit literally there, and that's something that's only we've been doing really since the scientific revolution, since we started trying to compete in the terms of literalism, that we started to realize science had a leg up on. But really, the myth is not, just a fable. It's certainly not a fable. It is actually a pattern of reality.
So
that we recognize and we write into a story to be able to teach people a moral lesson. Basically.
I'm going to do a slight tangent, but I think it'll make sense at the end of this. I had a friend of mine who kind of, blew my mind one time. He's like, look, think about Christ as a liar, a thief, a cheat, a trickster. Read the words and see how you feel. And now imagine that, say, it wasn't Jesus on the cross. It was somebody who looked just like him. And then Jesus hid in the cave. So when he popped out, he could make this lesson stick for 2,000 freaking years.
Wow.
I'm not saying that's the case, but it's, removing the individual from these
It almost
lessons
reminds me of
is
Dalai
important.
Lama. It's like the idea of the same soul living on in another person. It's like when Jesus was killed, he comes back, but they don't recognize him at first. Remember that in the scripture? They don't recognize him. Could it have been that someone else came along that was perfectly embodying this agapic love in such a way that they recognize this person as indistinguishable?
Yeah, it could be something like
From-
that. Or like I like to play in my head if I was
Sorry, people here, if we're opinionating about it. We're just brainstorming. We
Yeah,
have
no,
idea.
and actually, so like I don't believe this, but I think it's an interesting little rabbit hole to go down to. So it's said that Judas and Jesus looked a lot alike. So
Oof.
Judas may have been the man on the cross to sacrifice himself, and then Jesus popped out of the cave to make
That
this
could have been
message
a
stick.
beautiful thing that happened just between the two of them, and he
Yeah,
told Jesus,
and
"I want to do this for you."
I don't think this really ever happened. Like, I
like
think
that,
if
though.
Jesus was actually a person, he did hang on the cross, and the metaphor of him rising again through the cave was less mystical and more.
Well, I gotta admit, I lean towards thinking Jesus was a real human being. He did die on the cross, quite possibly, or he was brought so close to death,
Yeah.
and maybe he was able to slow his breathing to such a degree that he was able to almost go into
It's a little bit of a side, but I think
Yeah.
it's just interesting with that. It's
well,
like
we also
making
know
a point
there's
stick.
that in these times and for thousands of years, humans have gone into caves and closed themselves off
then are
because there's
reborn
a
again
powerful
out
sensory
of-
deprivation, and they would go in there and they'd meditate for days or sometimes for weeks. They would fast and they would meditate. God knows, maybe they were drinking entheogenically infused wines because that was something that was going on during that time too. Wines were infused with particular sacred plant medicines, and so God knows.
Yeah, it's a little bit of the side, but I think it really sums up how powerful Jesus' death was for making this message of agape. This before moving through you into someone else moving through. It really made it stick more than if I think if he just died of old age, comfortable at night. It was something that was very traumatic that shifted everyone around him, even people that weren't his followers.
And this myth tells the story of rebirth as well. It tells us how we can all actually become reborn, essentially. And you see this idea, it's also in Buddhism and the other mystery schools and the other wisdom schools. So this is not an idea that is only relegated to Christianity.
Yeah, right.
The idea of rebirth, of being reborn, of awakening.
So we get to Saul, who is
Yeah,
both
Saul.
a German, or excuse me, a Jew and a Jew and Roman at the same time as German. I don't know, a Jew and a Roman citizen, which is an antagonistic relationship.
That's
the
where
Jews
the
and the
German
Romans
came in as antagonistic relationship.
Yeah.
So Jew and a Roman citizen. Yeah, go on.
and
There's a very tense relationship between
but the way he
Jewish people and
the
the
way he
Roman.
justified this was to commit himself to certain laws, like behaviorals and conducts.
very committed to organized rules.
And he felt that
behavior
the followers
and
of,
conduct.
and he felt like the followers of the way were very threatening to the Jewish half.
Isn't that interesting that prior to being called followers of Christ or followers
Yeah.
of Jesus, the first followers
Of the way.
Christianity of Jesus were followers of the way. This
were
was actually the
waists.
way they were talked about, and this is what they were called.
So he became involved in the persecution. Here, I'll hold your coat while you throw the stones and kill this
Brutal,
guy.
dude, brutal.
Which that's
Yeah.
a special kind
Yeah,
of
'cause
evil right there.
He saw these people as deeply threatening.
It's not the evil that throws the stone; it's the evil that assists everybody in throwing the stones better.
Yeah, he wasn't a fan of Jews. He really was a fan of law and structure. And so, he saw this movement as deeply threatening, becomes involved with the persecution, holds the coats for the people.
That's brutal, man. That's like, dude. In all honesty,
Christians
if you want to
was
talk
originally a put down too before
Yeah.
it was even considered a good thing. for
how
people.
brutal that is to hold the coats while other people throw it, is how guilty of a person this person really truly was in the redemption arc that he had.
Yeah,
Saul at this time was a
that's a great
despicable
detail in the
human
story,
being.
man.
Like,
yeah,
if
because Stephen is being martyred and Saul is literally there helping.
here, let me
people
help
throw
you. Oh no,
stones.
it's let me
me
help
hold
you
your
with
coat.
that. But I'm not going to throw the stones myself. I'm just going to help you do it. So
Yeah.
he's a little bit lazy as well. And when he's going to go persecute the Christians, he's just going to get other people to kill people for him.
Yeah.
So this is how
he's
despicable
got guys
Saul
following
was.
him. That's why the
This-
painting shows all these people when he gets stopped on the road.
But
so
when he was on the road,
to Damascus
wham,
to round up
with the-
Christians
yeah,
and persecute them,
yeah.
put them on crosses and whatnot. he has a very powerful awakening or transformative experience. A higher state of consciousness occurs. He gets the bright light, the super salience of
So
reality.
much that they mentioned that he was struck to the ground by it. That's how
the realer than
profound it
real
was. Yeah.
experience. And yeah, he was struck to the ground. He's blinded by it. This deep inner conflict reminds us of Plato's concern with inner conflict. And this reveals our own psychology when we have an inner conflict and we can look upon it in that kind of higher mode of consciousness. So this transformative experience, he then travels to Antioch.
Real quick before that, so the conversation he had, and it's somewhat important. I think it sets up the how his brain is turning in this is, why do you persecute me? Who are you, Lord?
Oh, yeah.
And the word Lord as in something greater than you, like a landlord or a lord of a country or something bigger than him.
Yeah, he doesn't know who he is at
You
first.
know, I am Jesus that you persecute. So now he has to think, why am I doing this? Why am I persecuting this person? What's wrong with what this person's saying?
So the spirit of this ideal, this way, is now presented to him in a way that he can comprehend it. He is deeply struck by this experience. He probably was drinking some entheogenically infused wine on the road,
Or probably
maybe he passed
probably
a
the
burning
guilt
bush,
of watching Stephen die and participating in it too. That's like
burning
no matter
acacia
how.
bush that's loaded with the deems, you know.
Yeah, maybe he was just trying to get over. Like he's like, man, I felt real bad.
Or
for,
he just, or
you know?
or he could have been very hot and low on water and experience it that way. There's many ways that these experiences can happen to human beings. He could have been fasting for a long time without even meaning
Well,
to.
and also just
hungry.
Also, just like a profound sense of guilt that you haven't.
And the guilt
that you haven't. I don't want to say externalized, but externalized enough to look at. You're just hiding it, and then it builds up, and he, you know, had a emotional or a psychological breakdown as well. Like, you know, you can see this when people like, you know, hit rock bottom and they have, you know, I've had one recently where my brain just broke and I panic attack and all that stuff. But through that and after that, you know, you gain certain insights, and his, I would say, is way more than mine, because I haven't held coats for people while they stone somebody to death. But
pretty intense.
But then, yeah, so he travels to Antioch.
Yeah.
And is taken in by those he was going to persecute. Man,
Yeah.
what a kick in the nuts.
He experiences care from the people he was going to
Yeah,
destroy.
and they healed him up, and they treated him good, and they knew
His
who he
eyesight
was.
comes back.
Yeah, oh, yeah.
And I love that part, that his sight is restored at this
Yeah.
point, because they're showing him agape.
Yeah.
So his sight, his inner vision, and his view of reality is restored. It's like he's experienced sati. He's being born again. And that's why he changes his name. So we're all at war with agape itself, as Vervaeke tells us. This is so true. We have a tough time acknowledging this unconditional love when people give it to us.
Yeah, it's like, I don't need that. I can do it myself. Like, I'm fine. I can do
we're
everything
self-made.
myself. I don't need anything
we feel like
from
I'm
you.
self-secure,
Yeah.
I'm self-sustaining. Actually, those are the real fables. That's BS. None of us would have been able to become self-made, self-secure, self-sustaining
That's actually my
without the expression and the example of somebody else.
That's my biggest argument against the manosphere thing. Is it really pushes this idea of, you know, you're self-made, just get it for yourself and get yours and your own. And it's like, well, you know, I guess that could help for people who feel like they've been trampled on, but it really doesn't do anything, because you're not self-made.
What is manosphere? Is that like
Manosphere is like men going their own way,
The
and
MGTOW
incel,
thing?
yeah,
Okay.
MGTOW and
Yeah,
other
yeah.
stuff like that. And you see the leader figures. And
Yeah, you
stuff
guys
like
don't
that.
need to do that.
Well, you know, and hey, if you're
We
doing
don't- we
that,
don't.
good on you. But I think there's a more well-rounded way to do it. And the more well-rounded way is to realize that we all need each other to be able to share this unconditional love with each other. If we want to attain any remote iota of the state of being one with God, we need each other to be able to do that. You don't find that by yourself with your
And there's
riches and your palace.
Nothing wrong with deepening your brotherly love
Sure,
and association
sure.
with your fellow
Well,
male friends.
I'd even say in the manosphere, it's kind of antagonistic to that as well. And I'm not saying all of it, but it's just I'm a me and mine and me and mine.
Very egocentric.
Not like, hey, working, not like, hey, let's make a men's group
It's
to
what
talk
you
about
do when
problems
you've been burned and you're trying to close yourself
and
off
you're
in the world.
resentful.
You're resentful and you're trying to
And well, that's that
protect
war
yourself.
with agape. I don't want to admit that I need help from others and I need to help others. I should just be able
What
to.
got us here, though, is our mother's unconditional love to hold our head up straight and keep us alive.
And
for
our
those
father's unconditional love to
first
go
few
out there
years
and
that we can't
possibly
even-
die to go get us food.
Yeah,
You know.
yeah, and vice versa.
Yeah, it's
Sometimes the
like-
roles are switched. And so
I will admit though, like it's you see a mom, she naturally just knows how to hold the baby. At first, dads are like, I don't want to break it. Okay, and then they get into it and they're like, oh, this is great. But it's just funny. Watch dads holding their newborns for the first time, like their first newborn, and you can watch it on YouTube. You'll see them like holding this thing like, I don't want to break it. Whereas, when the baby's given to the mom, it's just like absorbed and natural. Whereas the dad has to be like, okay, this little slug thing, if I move wrong, I might break it. I'm just a bumbling buffoon. I don't know what to do.
So on that idea of brotherly love, and embracing your manhood, okay, that's great for our MGTOW guys out there, manosphere people. But there's also the side of it to where we can appreciate the positive aspects of masculinity without closing ourselves off from the rest of the world.
Well, and I think the same thing could be said with, more of the extreme versions of feminism as well. We don't need no man and all that stuff. It's the same thing, just on the opposite gender.
Newsflash, guys. There's such a thing as toxic masculinity and toxic femininity.
Doesn't mean masculinity and femininity are toxic. It means they have components that can become
neither of them
toxic.
are inherently toxic. In fact, there is a beautiful, wise, benevolent side to our masculinity and femininity, and we all, of course, have masculine and feminine aspects to ourselves when you're going beyond even the gender or sex idea.
Oh yeah, when we're talking about archetypes of thoughts or way of beings, or perennial things that happen over and over again, we tend to gender them because we are a binary species, so we tend to want to break things up. Like the earth is seeded by the sun and produces things out of it. We call earth her, and we call sun him. And have been doing that for countless thousands of years. It's just the easiest way for us to understand the universe, is to assign characteristics in a dualistic form, most simply, and then from that you can break it down.
Yes, but we've known for a long, long time, as the yin yang shows us, that
precisely.
Each has a little bit of the other in it.
Yeah, and must.
Yeah, the interrelated opposites require one another in order for either to exist in the first place. Can't have hot without cold. Can't have up without down, and so forth. So existence needs the opposites in order to exist.
Do you have any more notes on this part, or should we take a break? We're at the halfway point.
That about catches us up here, yeah.
Cool.
What's up, everybody? We are back.
So continuing with Saul's transformation.
Yes. So hopefully anyone that is listening is back in the room now. We're going to jump back in here to episode 16 of John Vervaeke's Awakening from the Meaning Crisis on Christianity and Agape.
So Saul goes into the desert to reflect, and this is always a biblical, mythological paradigm for a process of undergoing radical reflection. And when he comes out, he has gone through a radical transformative experience. So he's had this higher state of consciousness, this visionary experience. He then experiences agape from the very people he was persecuting. He goes into the desert, and when he comes back, he's a new person. He's gone through a radical transformative experience, and we know that because he's changed his name. He changed his name from Saul to Paul. And he has a radical message. It's a powerful message. He comes to present agape in one of the most beautiful passages, famous passages in the Bible. You've probably heard it at some point. It's often misread at weddings. People read this passage often at weddings, and they, I think, are misinterpreting it because what Paul's talking about is an agapic spiritual kind of love. Now, there should definitely be that aspect in a romantic relationship, but I don't think romantic relationships typically are understood by most people as venues in which agapic love is the primary focus. Let me read the passage to you. So, Paul begins by saying, "And now I will show you the most excellent way." So, He's showing you the most excellent way. This is, and notice the word excellent, the way in which we can most radically go through transformation and grow. I'll show you the most excellent way. Now, he's not going to make an argument like Plato. Instead, what he's going to do is he's going to present everything from the framework of a participatory kind of knowing. That's how he begins. So he's not making an argument. He's talking about what his very identity, how his identity is being informed and transformed by its conformity to agapic love. If I speak in the tongues of men and angels but have not love, I am only a resounding gong or a clanging cymbal. If I have the gift of prophecy and can fathom all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have faith that can move mountains but have not love, I am nothing. Notice all the language here. This is participatory language. This is the language of knowing by identifying. If I give all I possess to the poor and surrender my body to the flames, because Christians are starting to be burnt, right? But I have not love, I gain nothing. Notice this language here. It's very radical. Love is patient. Love is kind. It does not envy. It does not boast. Now this, of course, is not romantic love, because romantic love does experience envy and jealousy. It is not proud. It is not rude. It is not self-seeking. It is not easily angered. It keeps no record of wrongs. Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. It always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres. Those are the features you need in order to help and afford someone coming into personhood. Love never fails. Now, we think, what are you talking about? I've been in so many relationships and they fail. That's because you're thinking of this as romantic love. That love does fail. What he means is agape can't fail. We are always born from and always have to give birth to agape, or personhood itself will disappear. But where there are prophecies, they will cease. Where there are tongues, they will be stilled. Where there is knowledge, it will pass away. Now, he's trying to get them to understand, like, what are we talking about here? For we know in part and we prophesy in part. But when perfection comes, perfection here meaning completion, the imperfect disappears. And people, you're like, what? And so he gives a metaphor, one we've seen elsewhere. When I was a child, I talked like a child. I thought like a child. I reasoned like a child. When I became a man, I put childish ways behind me. Okay, so when you're a kid, you have a particular identity, you have a particular salience landscape, right? And things really, really matter to you in a certain way. We talked about this when we talked about Sarfason. When you become an adult, right, your world becomes radically reoriented. What is salient and what is central to you is radically changed. So I hope for many of you as adults, your life is not primarily centered upon and oriented towards the super saliency of candy and toys. If you're, right, really, really oriented towards candies and toys and playing, then of course you're not growing up as an adult. When we go through agape, it is like the change in our salience landscape and our fundamental identity. How we participate in ourselves in the world is fundamentally transformed. And that's what Paul is offering here. Then he says, look, you've got to know what this means. Now we see but a poor reflection as in a mirror. Then we shall see face to face. Now I know in part, then I shall know fully, even as I am fully known. And now these three remain: faith, hope, and love, but the greatest of these is love. Okay, so now it's like we're seeing a reflection. We're not in touch with reality. We're like the people in Plato's cave. We're looking at the shadows and the echo. We don't see things as they are. We're not in touch with reality. But with agape, the most excellent way, we will come to know as we are known. Right? He's talking about this participatory love. Think about how when you are and now even use a romantic relationship, one with some significant depth. When you really love someone, how you know them to the degree to which they know you. Right? It is such a participatory way of knowing. You get to be in touch with their reality in a way that somebody else doesn't. That's part of the bargain of a mature understanding of a romantic relationship, right? You give up the extensive erotic pursuit of many different partners in order that you can deeply know and be known by someone else. And that's like growing up. That's like going from being a child to a man. So Paul is actually talking about there's a way of knowing. We're going to come back to this. The term that's being used there is gnosis, that is bound up with agape, this way of loving. See, so all these things, God is agape, we forgive agape, we are forgiven by agape, we know as we are known, we are participating in the becoming a person of others, and then they are participating in ours. It's this powerful, whole new way of being. And it has become so sedimented in our culture and so ossified and so below how we live. It's like the ground we're walking on. And like the ground we walk on, we have contempt for it without realizing how much it holds everything up. I'm not a Christian. I'm not advocating for Christianity. I'm trying to get you to understand how profound an expression of meaning, transcendence, and way to wisdom is being on offer here. Now, there's a dark side to this, I think, and here's where I will probably part company with people who identify as Christians. See, the with participatory knowing and this gnosis, we'll talk more about this, right? This knowing by participation and going through radical metanoic transformation, right? This gnosis agape that Paul talks so much about. There is a danger with it, right? There's a danger of misunderstanding. So, we have to go carefully here. Look, when I am knowing someone, participatory, agapic relationship, right? My knowing of them and my knowing of myself are deeply, they're inseparably bound together. That's why Jesus will say this relationship he has to God is, I and the Father are one. And Paul will say, it's not I who live, but Christ who lives in me. Right? This is knowing by this deep bonding of identity. You know not by transforming your thoughts or even, right, your mind. You know by transforming yourself. But there's a danger to this. The danger is that any aspect of yourself that you do not properly understand, has not come into knowledge, can get projected onto what you love. This is the great danger also in the romantic relationship. Precisely because you are so bound to this person in your identity, a lot of what is unconscious in your identity get projected onto that person. So see, this is why there's such a moral obligation on you when you enter into a romantic relationship to commit yourself to a process of self-knowledge in the Socratic sense, self-discovery, because the degree to which you are self-ignorant is the degree to which that participatory knowing will be darkened and twisted into a projection of aspects of yourself. And I think, to my mind, for all of his astonishing spiritual brilliance, that's also happening in Paul. See, the inner conflict in Paul was very profound. He comes up against the problem that many of us encounter. Aristotle talked about this with acrasia and weakness of the will. We know what we should do, and we do the opposite of what we know is the right thing to do. I know what I should do. It's clear in my mind that this is what I should do, and yet I do this. Somehow, even though knowing what I should do, I find myself almost as if I'm being pulled to do something else. And he describes it, Paul uses the language of like somebody in the midst of a civil war who's standing sort of at the center of their citadel, and the outlying provinces are in revolt. And he experiences this radical inner conflict. There's lots of different theories about what this is, what's he so conflicted about. But Paul comes up with a narrative. Of course it's going to be a narrative, right? He's in the Israelite Jewish tradition. He comes up with a narrative for understanding this conflict. And it's the narrative that comes from a personalization of the notion of the movement from the two worlds as being, right, a liberation from an old place and a movement to a new place, the Exodus. Because Christianity is personalizing this, Paul experiences the Exodus personally. He experiences, there's two of him. There's the old Saul, right, who wants to, right, follow the way of the law, but is actually, right, feels guilty and angry and feels disconnected from God and rejected by God. And then there's the new Paul, the Paul of love, who feels connected. And he sees the old man and the new man. And what's happening is the new man is trying to be born from the old man. And so we have picked, this has become endemic to our culture. This idea of the old me and the new me. We think, oh, this is just natural. I came up with this. Such bullshit we tell ourselves at times. The old me and the new me. Paul understands this, and he understands this tension between the old Saul that was committed to law and order and justice and punishment, and the new Paul who is participating in the liberation of love. And he's trying to understand, why do I have this inner conflict? Because he's personalized the God of history, he understands his inner conflict. And here's where I think the danger of projection is clear. He understands his inner conflict as reflecting an inner conflict in God. God was actually conflicted within himself. It's a radical idea, and we need to know this. Not because, again, I'm trying to advocate for Christianity, because we have to understand Paul in order to understand Augustine and in order to understand Luther. And we have to understand Augustine and Luther if we're going to understand the meaning crisis. So you've got this idea that God has two aspects to him or herself. One part is God represents law and justice and order. And insofar as God represents that, we stand in judgment. We have somehow failed. We have not lived up to the moral perfection that morality demands for us. Look, Kant made a point about this. Morality demands nothing less than perfection from you. You have to be completely honest, you have to be completely courageous, and none of us can ever meet that standard. Now, I mean, we need to balance that with compassion and love. But what Paul is seeing is he's saying, well, God is perfectly just. And therefore we fail to meet that standard, and therefore legally we are condemned to death. But yet, God isn't just a judge, God is also the agapic parent that loves us. And so what he does is he takes the notion that Jesus' death was somehow sacrificial, because we've talked about how sacrifice is born up within agapic love, and he gives it to this idea that Jesus sacrificed himself in order to satisfy God's demand for justice, so that God was capable of freely loving us. Now, and how that redemption model works out, there's all kinds of theological battles about it, and whether or not we should understand it this way or that way is not relevant to our purposes. What's relevant, right, is that within this astonishing foundational message of gnosis and agape, there's also an attempt to project on, this sounds so radical, and I don't mean to make it sound ridiculous. I'm trying to be respectful. But the idea that somehow the course of reality itself is enmeshed in a conflict between justice and agape. What that's going to mean is that people that experience deep inner conflict are going to find a welcoming home within the auspices of Christianity. Individuals who are riven by a sense, right, of personal failure, of not living up to what they can and should be, that their personhood has been thwarted, they have not come into a fullness, a perfection, as Paul says, a completeness of their personhood, are going to be deeply attracted to the Christian message. Now, you're probably now seeing how this might be relevant to the meaning crisis. Because what happens if we still, because we are still participating in the waters of Christianity within our culture, even if we're not Christians, and most of us aren't anymore. But how do we tap into all of this? The power of agape, acknowledging its reality, the participatory gnosis, the radical transformation. Our own sense of not living up to the fullness of our personhood. What if we still experience all of that, but we do not have the machinery of Christianity with its metaphysics of cosmic redemption available to us? That could be a powerful experience of despair. I mean, Camus famously said, "My whole of my life, I've tried to figure out how can I be a saint without there being a God?" And he, of course, famously came to the conclusion that reality was radically absurd. We'll come back to that. So there is a price we pay. And this is not a statement of resentment, but there is a price we pay for the gifts, to use a Christian word, the grace. That's what grace originally means. The gifts that Christianity has given us. It has given us expectations of love and transformation and growth into personhood and relief from inner conflict. Expectations that I would say are not well met in our post-Christian worldview. So we carry the grammar of God, but we no longer believe any of the things we say with it, for many of us. So what I'd like to do is try and now trace how Christianity, coming out of the Israelite Jewish heritage, and I've already sort of been making allusions of this, starts to intersect with the axial revolution that was coming out of Greece. Because Christianity is going to take up into itself, the Stoicism we've already talked about. Paul quotes Stoicism in the Bible. And as it does that, it's also going to come into some conflict actually, to be honest, but it's going to come into confluence with that strain of the actual revolution spirituality that came out of Greece. It's going to come into connection with Neoplatonism. It's going to come into connection with Gnosticism. So next time what I want to look at is I want to look at the Gnostics, these followers of Jesus, because of course it's controversial to call them Christians, who really center in on this gnosis agape, what they were talking about, and the Neoplatonism, because all of that is going to have an impact on the generation of more orders of meaning. We'll review that again, but if you remember, we talked about how with Aristotle we had developed, right, in the West, a nomological order to meaning, a way in which we could pursue worldview attunement. We're going to see that as Neoplatonism and Christianity come together, we're going to get two more orders of meaning emerging, an order by which we pursue the most excellent way, and an order by which this cosmic narrative history is enmeshed into the Western worldview. Thank you very much for your time and attention.
Meow, 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 meow. Meow. Ruff, ruff, ruff. Meow. Ruff, ruff, ruff. Meow. Ruff, 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 ruff. Meow.
Awesome. That was really good. It's one of my favorite episodes.
So we're introduced to the idea of the going into the desert, which is the process of radical.
Pause this here. Let me switch over.
Which is the process of radical reflection, and then coming out is the transformation.
Yes.
So he went in as Saul and came out as Paul. And it's interesting because, like when we, transform in our own lives, there's quite often a change of name, like kid will want to be called something else, or, no longer Jimmy, I'm James, or, like,
right. Yeah. You see it in the Far East, people when they become enlightened will take on a new name. That's certainly not uncommon. So we're seeing this happens in the West as well. And Saul goes into the desert for a process of deep self-reflection. And I wonder if desert is like code for fasting, because this was definitely a way of achieving higher states of consciousness that was used and taught during Christian times.
I think just the act of going into it, and like say
Good place to fast.
like, and I'll say Eastern on the globe, but like in the West, in the West, in the Native American traditions, those who lived in the desert have their own practices that they go into the desert for this quest, if you will. But the desert is, what
If it's to the east, and that's towards the sun too, right?
do you mean?
Towards like the rising sun.
I guess depending on which way you're going, but like the idea of going out somewhere with nothing in it and it's just
Yes.
you
Yes.
to reflect upon yourself.
Into a mode of complete desertion.
Yeah. Yeah.
Really.
Desertion,
Yeah.
quite literally.
I'm trying to figure out what the metaphor might mean there. But that also was a place that people would go to do that, to desert their sense of self and to go very deep. Regardless, he has this visionary experience, and then he experiences agape through the people that he was going to destroy. Their healing love that they gave him with, forgiving him prior to anything that he's even knowing him. And so, yeah, Saul becomes Paul. He comes to present agape as the most excellent way. And there's that term again, the way.
Yeah, and excellent, to excel.
The highest, most perfected way
Yeah.
of all of them. And this is not an argument in the way that he states it, too, in the typical Socratic fashion. He comes from a place of participatory knowing with that statement, if I
Yes. So
speak in tongues of...
I have it written
You
here.
have it?
So, if I speak in tongues of men and angels, but have not love, I am only a resounding gong, a clanging of cymbals. If I have the gift of prophecy and cannot fathom all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have faith that I can move mountains, but have not love, I am nothing. And
That's
that was
massive.
yeah. And let's see.
I love the part where it does not envy, does not boast, it's not self-seeking, it doesn't record wrongs, it rejoices in truth, it always perseveres.
If
Love never fails.
If I give all I possess to the poor and surrender my body to the flames, but I have not love, I gain nothing. So love is a patient love, is what Vervaeke said at that point.
Yeah.
It does not envy, it does not boast. I won't go through the whole thing, but I'll have to look up that scripture too.
I like where how he describes love never fails. Agape can't fail because we're born from agape, and our personhood itself disappears without love. This is also how we bestow personhood, humanity, on others, our loved ones, like such as the children we raise. I like the part also when I was a child, and then on to when I became a man.
I have a note here that agape can't fail. We're always born from and give birth to agape. It's the before that that you can be for.
It's the fundamental change in how we orient ourselves to the rest of humanity. So now, as we are but a poor mirror, or not? I'm trying to. What part of the scripture do you have that part handy?
Let's see.
Now, as we see not as a poor mirror, now we see face to face. I think that's the gist of it. And that is an allusion to the idea of seeing like shadows, like Plato's cave. It's illusory. Instead of seeing shadows as real, now we have come to see reality face to face. With agape, we come to know as we are known.
Okay, so
as we are oriented in love and as we are experiencing agape, we become known.
As in a mirror, then we shall see face to face. Now I know in part, then I shall know fully, even as I am fully known. And now these three remain: faith, hope, and love. But the greatest of these is love. Sorry, it's hard with this because there's no quotations. It's just straight up, so it's hard to figure out which one's Vervaeke and which one's him quoting. Yeah.
We know this through relationship, and in our relationships, this is from the part where Vervaeke was speaking on relationships specifically, like love relationships. We know them as far as they know us, and we get to know them deeper than anyone else, and they get to know us in a more deep
Yeah.
way.
In a way that's giving up the eros aspect of love.
Yeah, to be deeply known and to deeply know someone else. Yeah, beyond the eros.
So the gnosis agape, the knowing
way
love.
of knowing, and this
Yeah.
is where we get the idea that God is agape. God is love. That's where this idea of God is love comes from.
And not to be
It's
confused
a
with
generative kind of love.
and gnosis, not to be confused with what it has turned into within the past like 150, 200
Yeah, we're not
years or
yet
so.
talking about the group of Gnostics that we'll get into
Well,
in the next
or
episode,
further
or their
past-
or how part of their
Because
formation is based off of this potential misunderstanding of Paul's.
Well, because even like something as beautiful as this idea of gnosis and agape, like have been insanely perverted now with, the you call it social justice end of things. If you really dig deep enough, it's this weird perversion of gnosis and a mixture between gnosis and alchemy that a few people that weren't checking themselves on the bullshit wrote some stuff down and got really popular. Then people took that and then didn't check themselves on the bullshit. And then we started, eventually murdering each other in hundreds of millions. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
If you,
When social justice
James Lindsay really goes into
becomes
this very
co-opted
well.
by ideologues, you could say, like deeply possessed ideologues that are so certain.
Well, I would say, hold on. I would
Of their
say,
point of view.
like, I would have to agree with James Lindsay on this. Like, he's been really breaking this down, but the philosophical origins of all this come back to, you got people like, like Hegel and Marx and all this stuff.
Sure.
What they were doing,
I agree with
what they were
Lindsay's
doing
interpretation.
was
I'm just separating.
What I'm trying to say though was heavy perversion
Right.
of something that wasn't entirely perfect to begin with.
Absolutely. Because I'm trying to differentiate between social justice is a good thing, but nowadays we have what people are being termed social justice warriors. These are people that are so convinced that they're absolutely right. They're not trying to understand from others' points of view at all. And the warrior is to show that this is a very amped up version of ideological possession, a belief that they're doing social justice, when in fact they're not doing social justice. Social justice is a good thing.
Well, I would. This is off topic, but ultimately, I think it comes from the Hegelian idea of negative thinking. So you have thesis, antithesis, and
That spin on social justice has ruined social justice. You have Martin Luther King's social justice. You have Hegelian social justice.
I think
You have an all-inclusive agape approach, and then you have a divisive approach that breaks us apart, that fragments. The idea that there should be justice for us and socially is a good idea, but to go warrior mode with it, as we see people doing nowadays, obsessively, hatefully,
that's where
cruelly,
this
divisively.
danger, this dark side comes in, and it's
Right.
not just nowadays. I mean, it's been we killed hundreds of millions of our own, because of this, because of this dark side of the gnosis, this misunderstanding, and our projecting our issues onto what is perfect.
Yeah, agreed.
So Paul had his own issues with it because if God is this ultimate perfect thing and we can't hold ourselves completely up to this perfection, therefore our punishment is death. Well, if God is also compassionate love, he sent his only son here to die for us, to pay for our sins.
Right.
And that's where that comes, that's innocent enough, but how many wars also were fought over, like,
that
who's who and who's right.
So there's a danger of misunderstanding here. Much of our unconsciousness can be projected onto others. Yeah. So this knowing by way of reciprocal realization does have a downside, because sometimes there might be something that we haven't realized yet about ourselves that's still unconscious, and so in that we can make the mistake of projecting that onto others.
Yeah, it's almost like casting your shadow onto something that needs light.
Because a relationship is mutual self-discovery.
Yeah.
And that's not what's happening when one becomes ideologically possessed.
Yeah, and what is it?
Takes on the moniker of social justice warrior.
Love is what is it? Not unveiling, but what was the term that was used? Disclosing. Yeah, love is
mutually accelerated disclosure.
Yeah,
that's such a great.
So that's
term.
something to really think about, though. To protect yourself from, well, the bullshit. It's like,
Yes.
well, if I can't disclose,
myself to others,
well, and even
and allow them to disclose to me equally.
well, and even your own shadow too. Like, that's why it's nice to have others, because they can be like, okay, well, that's your shit and this is my shit, and don't put your shit on me, because
Right.
it's like, and I'm going to try not to, like, so call me out on mine. And like, that's why we can't just do it by ourselves. We
That's
constantly
it.
need other
Yeah.
people too,
Yeah.
for this.
Yeah,
for this
because we
love.
are a society. Society is made up of we individuals.
Mm-hmm.
So we need each other to create a healthy society.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, this inner conflict in Paul, this encounter with his own acrasia. He's knowing something is true, but he's also being pulled to do something else, and we experience that conflict within ourselves all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Paul begins participating more and more through the wisdom of love. He develops this narrative and personalizes the story of liberation, the personal exodus. There's the old Saul, the guilty, rejected, disconnected, and then there's the new Paul, love and connection. Paul's participation with the wisdom of love helps him understand his inner conflict as reflecting, understands conflict as reflective of his inner conflict. But he kind of stops there. He gets a little bit stuck, it sounds like, because he sees God on one hand as law and justice, and so we are condemned by his judgment.
Which we
This
can
was
never,
his idea.
which we can never, never ever reach, because we are
Yes.
imperfect.
Yes. Yet he also loves us with agape, like a parent's unconditional love. And so Paul sees Jesus' sacrifice of himself as a way to satisfy God's sense of justice.
So God can love us.
But this is
Paul's
a projection
biggest-
of Paul's, because he's got his own conflict within him.
Paul's
He's got
biggest
an
issue here
inner
is
civil war.
God loves you regardless.
Yeah.
You don't need to earn God's love.
Yeah, but see, Saul, as we remember, he was very, very obsessed with law and order.
behavior. Yeah.
And then he goes through this process of experience agape. So now he's got this inner conflict. These two sides of himself are warring. So he tries to solve it by depicting God as some kind of two-sided thing.
Yeah.
And so this helps birth. This is actually what births a lot of Gnosticism.
And he calls this justice and agape and meshing on his little the little breaks on the bottom there. But that makes sense. Like meshing the justice, the ultimate judge, with the ultimate love, parental love, trying to mesh them together.
Yes, that's
while applying
right.
your own shit onto God.
Yes, Saul's attempt to project the idea of his own core inefficiencies is enmeshed in the idea of justice versus agape. Christianity becomes now a welcome home for those who have that sense of falling short, of failing.
Sure. Well, yeah, like I
to
was
come
saying,
to the fullness of their potential.
the ex-alcoholic, the ex-criminal, the ne'er-do-well, the sex addict. I guess there's a good reason for why you see these people. They pick up the Bible and they're like,
It's a beautiful idea of redemption.
I can be redeemed. Oh, there's something that is perfect, and I will never be perfect. Well, this guy died for me, and if I just embrace him into my heart, then I'll be saved. And it's like, if that does it for you, but I think you're really missing the mark of what Jesus was getting at.
Yeah, I think Paul misses it a little bit. I think
Yeah.
he's right that the idea of redemption is a beautiful thing,
Yes.
but that God is like this super harsh judge that is like some kind of weird, discordant, disharmonized thing that's happening. Like, he just can't understand how these two things can exist at once. But that's as far as along as he is.
Well, that's another conundrum, just like just like Plato had when he saw his greatest teacher and his favorite state. Well, his favorite state killed his favorite teacher.
Right.
Both things he loved very much, and how could this happen?
Yeah.
And Socrates had his like, well, they say I'm the wisest man, but I know I'm not the wisest man. But I guess I am the wisest man, but I'm not the wisest man. So there's always seems to be these two little counter things that just
He
continues to
realizes
turn
that
us.
they identified him as the wisest man because he knows what he doesn't know.
Yeah. So it's
And
like,
his humility in that is what he recognizes. Oh, it's my orientation. It's not that I'm the smartest. It's that I'm utilizing an orientation of being willing to know what I don't know and remain open in a sense.
so how do we tap into all that is agape without the machinery of Christianity, which it can lead to despair. Like if you don't have it,
sure.
and to be a saint without God is absurd.
Yeah.
So, but like, how do you be saintly without
Albert
the necessity
Camus,
of having God?
Yeah, Albert Camus
You
talks
know?
on this. How can I be a saint without there being a God? So yeah, he in turn ends up thinking reality is absurd. That
Yeah, it's absolutely absurd. Like if you were just basing up sainthood off of the pretext of having a God, which, you know, as we're finding out as we go through this, it helps to have the idea of the highest of the high of the high of the high, particularly for morals and such things. But can we take this meaning making leading into agape and do it in a way that doesn't require, like, you can have your God and you can have your religion,
Without
but it
the
doesn't
guilting.
require having God or religion, that we can naturally do. And I
Right.
think that would be the second coming of Christ, is when we figure that out. Like, that's what they talk about, Christ coming back again, is us figuring the agape out again without the need of, you know, it's all people's
a
coming
particular
together.
personified
Yeah.
one religion's view of what God is.
Yeah.
Sorry, guys, God is ineffable.
Yeah,
That's
it's
whatever it is
undescribable.
infinite. Whatever it is that transcends us.
And as soon
It
as
does
we
allow
define
us
it,
an
it is no
ultimate-
longer
Yeah.
that. It is something much more.
Yeah, and it allows us an ultimate ideal to grow towards. It always ends up being so much more than whenever we define it, like you say. It's so true. We'll never be finished understanding God, so we might as well get involved in the participatory realization and communion with this transcendent ideal that is beyond us.
and so-
And maybe there is a God, but whatever we're saying when we say God is typically a small confined idea, and we got to take the edges, the borders off of that idea,
When ultimately it's not my God.
because we end up fighting over it when we walled in like that.
Yeah, and
This
it's-
is the way God is.
yeah,
No,
or
this is the way God is.
It's my God and you have your God. It's
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
no, it's just God. It's just
Just
God.
just
It's
a generative,
God.
omnipresent thing that also is destructive.
The everything,
It's generative and destructive.
the
There's birth
everything
life,
and
there's
the
that.
nothing that makes everything. But so Vervaeke said something that kind of sticks out to me and makes a lot of sense for where we have found ourselves now. So like these values, you know, these Christian values in the grammar we still use all the time, but we don't believe it anymore. And it's something that's so deeply ingrained and ossified below us that we walk over top of it and we have contempt for it now. And well, if you look at, you know, like say the social justice stuff or the Satanists,
And you think you're being
or-
good by having contempt because you're
well, they're
putting up a flag to show I'm a part of your group.
the thing is they're just
I belong to, right?
They're not Christians. They're Christians that have contempt for, and I won't say
In
Christians.
expressing our contempt, we think that we're expressing our
Oh,
virtue.
yeah, well, I'm not a Christian.
we're being
a lot of your
virtuous.
values are, so why have contempt for them? Well, let's just remove the metaphysical end of it and figure out the good things that it has, just like with everything else, instead of just saying, oh, we're better and above, and this crap that we walk, literally, we've paved the roads for our, or
Yeah,
the past
let's
has paved the roads for
look
us.
with curiosity.
And we walk with contempt over top of them.
Exactly. Yeah. Let's
That's-
look with curiosity and interest and inquisitiveness and wonder upon our past and how humans have been trying for eons to find a way to be better with one another, to be better for within themselves. And that's a beautiful ideal. And of course we haven't been perfect at it. And of course people have used Christianity and other religions and spiritual traditions in horrifying ways, but that doesn't take away
I don't think
from
you-
Buddhism or Christianity.
Yeah, I don't
or-
think you can name a tradition
Yeah.
that doesn't have a mark of blood on it.
Right? No, I don't think you can. I can't find one
Even,
culture in
even
history that
Buddhism,
hasn't
there have been sects of Buddhism that were very
violent. Yeah.
So one that we tend to think is very
No one is
pacifist, but
better
it's
than
like,
the other.
no.
You know, the way that we're comparing them
What's
nowadays.
that's the whole thing, you know.
They all have unique insights and perspectives, and it's all human history together. Like it took us thousands of years to develop these ideas, and they stand the test of time for a reason because there are aspects of them that are timeless.
Yeah, well, and you know, I guess the best way to go about it is figure out what they're all talking about.
Yeah.
And then figure out which ones do, like, you know, which practices or religions or belief sets, which ones do different things better. And I know I'm going to get a lot of crap from, you know, I can hear Michael Knowles just screaming in my head, no, you're not supposed to do that. But no, like, you know, sampling to a certain degree of all the philosophies and all the religions to really find the one true. You have to dance around the ineffable to gain an understanding
Yeah, you
of
do.
it. And you have to dance
do.
with many partners at the same time.
And there are truths that you find are complementary
Sure.
across very many different belief systems and traditions. And there are ways where they pick up where each other leave off, or they take different angles on things that are very useful. There's add-ons that one doesn't incorporate as much. So this is beautiful. This is good. These things will interweave and complement each other very well, and they have been for thousands of years anyway.
We've been doing it, and we're still here. And
Yeah, because very much of the way that Christians practiced Christianity for thousands of years was inspired by Neoplatonism.
Yep, and a mix of local paganistic traditions that we're not Abrahamic or any other type of God worshiping, but we're more necessity worshiping the land and nature and
Earth,
paying
tree.
attention to it. Well, the reason why pagans
Animal.
worship the land is because they had to survive. Because
And when we say
the land
pagans,
is
the
hard.
pagan isn't a religion either. Pagan is
No,
just a
it's-
word for folk
or
spiritual traditions
or non-Abrahamic,
and it's a
really.
wide umbrella
Yeah.
for a lot of different local folk.
Yeah, because
traditions
you've
of
got your Northern European paganistic, you got your Siberian pagan,
You have your Celtic.
but then you have like your desert, nomad pagan religions.
Yes.
You could consider Native American religions to be pagan as well.
That's what Christians thought when
So
they
that's
ran into
that's
them.
what I mean by pagan is just not non-theistic in the sense of the gods aren't personified people. The God, maybe sometimes we represent, like Thor has his hammer and all that stuff, but no, it's more of based in the earth and the dirt of things and the things that make things grow and, the storm that will come at you that you have to be wary of and learn lessons that way. And that come from trying to survive, because yet again, the world does not care whether you live or die. It is just brutally perfect the way it is. And as humans, we're trying our damnedest to survive through it all. And now we're contending with space, which is even more just doesn't care about space. You think the world doesn't care about you? Space does not care about you.
Ruthlessly neutral.
Yeah, most of it's nothing, and the rest of it just wants to burn you to a crisp or crush you into oblivion. It's like, woo!
Jordan Peterson breaks down the Old Testament versus the New Testament really well, and talking about how there's this side of God that's very judgmental and angry and willing to be destructive, and it's showing the ruthless neutrality of nature. That nature can sometimes just quake. Or burst open and spill out lava and, flood the planet. It can cast you into ice age for thousands of years. It can do some pretty brutal things. It might hit us with an asteroid. And then we had this contrast of the New Testament God, which is this super agape loving ideal as well. And this is very much what Paul seems to have been wrapped up in.
Sure.
Coming from his Jewish background, especially.
Yeah. And
There's
actually,
this inner conflict,
and the way
with the different ways God has been presented, and the idea of law and justice. Has been presented
and
through
it's
God.
like the technique that he's using to justify being a Jew and a Roman at the same time. That law and order, then that was fused together and then became one half. So then, there's this God that is agape, but I still can't get over this idea of everything must be this law and order, very strict and staunch.
Yeah. He just
and not
he was
condemning
disgusted
Paul
by
either.
the followers of the way at first. He was disgusted by the Christians.
Well, they're
they were
running around being like,
disruption to
love
his whole belief
everybody
system,
and hold hands.
Yeah,
and
they were like the hippies of their day.
and talk with women and children and cripples. What are you doing? You can't do that.
The existing power structure and what stability that they had finally after Rome and the Jews fighting each other for so long, and so they had this kind of tenuous balance going on, and he's like, "Don't disrupt the balance, you crazy people." And
Well,
so
and
he's
then
ready to go off and kill him and destroy him.
the Christians had their
put 'em
point in
up on-
time. Where they burnt down the Library of Alexandria. So, as things evolve, nothing stays pure and awesome, or starts out pure and awesome and wonderful either.
And that was back when there were several sects of Christianity in Rome. There was like 16 or more different sects of Christianity during this time when the Library of Alexandria was burned.
Yeah.
So that was a particularly, you could say, maybe vicious one, but certainly at least
I would just say chaotic.
a little bit fundamentalist.
Is that
a little
not
bit-
how we learn those?
This is exactly. That's
know,
right.
it's
We're
like-
calibrating as a species here. And we got to see ourselves from that telescopic view sometimes to understand, that's right. We're in the midst of time here. We are not done evolving. We're not perfect.
I think that's
We're
the
not supposed to be perfect. Yet.
That's the necessity for proper history taking, taking proper history and notes of history so we can have that rise above effect to look back as
know
not being
thyself.
so entrenched in it
Yeah.
where we're like directly in it and subject to the emotions, but relatable enough where we can look back at it and be like, okay,
Right.
I
yeah,
see.
because
I
I'm
see.
not just the individual. I'm not just this person. I'm humanity. I'm all of everything that came before me. I couldn't speak without everyone that came before me formulating language. I wouldn't have any understanding of reality without my culture and all of the books of knowledge that we have written and handed down, and so on and so forth. So we're
I think we're doing a pretty good job, though.
islands unto ourselves.
Humans, we've killed a whole hell of a lot of ourselves, but I mean,
So do caterpillars.
yeah.
Kill a lot of the life around them
Yeah.
before they become butterflies.
And
And then
in-
they become super pollinators
Yeah.
and protectors of the forest that help it flourish and
But
grow. So
imagine-
we might be in a phase shift
imagine
right
how
now.
how worse off we'd be if we weren't developing these meaning making systems.
Yeah. Right.
Because though these things are great, we still do bad things. Imagine we probably wouldn't have gotten out of the Stone Age without these
No,
meaning making systems. We'd
yeah.
still be bashing 2 rocks against somebody's head.
We would probably be doing some kind of Roman version of the Purge right now.
Yeah, or something. It's just like, so, it's easy to get real cynical and down on it, particularly while we're in such an upheaval point in time. But it's important to realize the whole the process as a whole, opposed to just atomized parts.
Right.
And it's not necessarily who was wrong and who was in the right. It was just like, well, what happened?
What happened, right? Yeah.
What happened? When
How
did
did
it
this
happen?
disagreement come
Maybe
about?
why? A little bit of why did it happen?
Mm-hmm.
Like so and so stole a pig from so and so, and then they fought, and then you get the Hatfield and McCoy
Yeah.
issue.
Yeah. If you want to know more about human history, dig into Dan Carlin's Hardcore History. I love that podcast. I can't stop listening to it. And Vervaeke's Awakening from the Meaning Crisis has been very much like a super long form Dan Carlin exposition for me. I don't know if you've ever watched any of the
I've
Dan
watched a bit
Carlin.
of Dan Carlin,
Or
yeah.
listened to a bit of Dan
Yeah,
Carlin. He's
yeah.
great. Yeah.
It's
It's another good podcast recommend for you guys.
watching with the ears. And if you're a musician, you'll get that joke because sometimes it's just like, oh yeah, I see you. I see what you're doing. And you're not even looking at the person. It's like, oh yeah, I see you. That's all the notes I have
That's
on.
great. Yeah, me
on
too,
that.
man.
And it actually, 10:43. We're like we're getting good at this timing thing.
Hey.
Yeah.
That's cool how we're actually finding we're starting to get to a similar length of time with each episode now.
Yeah, a good flow.
Yeah, so we don't go on too long for you guys, hopefully. But if you got any ideas of how we can improve this, feel free to share them. We're learning as we grow here ourselves.
And I get that, 2 hours and 45 minutes, 2 hours and a half. It's a pretty long time, so it means a lot when people stick around
Yeah.
and listen to the whole thing.
Yeah, and when you approach something this long, don't think that anyone expects you to listen to it all at once. We understand that people have things going on in their lives.
Yeah.
It's okay to pause and pick it up later on in the week or whatever
For
it
sure.
is later in the day.
That's why it helps to have these breaks too while we talk and have them, so you can just take the first part, listen to the discussion, and then think about that a little bit and come back. Oh, where was I at? And just look at the video and be like, okay, that's the next part. I see John again. All right, let's bring it up. That's what I do.
Yeah. Yeah, so I hope you guys are getting as much out of this as I know we are.
Yeah.
And I'm really excited to be able to continue sharing this with everyone out there, because it's, there's a hole in the world that only we can fill, and not knowing where we fit in is a very disjointed experience. Being able to find our way home together, how we may awaken from this meaning crisis together, feels like the greatest work of our time.
Yep. Well, it's better than nothing.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Well, at least we're hitting at the root now. We're finding a root, and we're not just
Yeah.
hacking at the limbs of symptoms that we identify as we typically do in our modern age.
Yeah.
So this is the next level of the game, fam. And we love having you guys here with us, and look forward to us. Once again, American Dharma's got a show on February 10th. We're going to be at Zen West in Baltimore, Maryland. February 11th, we're going to be in Hedgesville, West Virginia, at Seven Moons Wellness Shop, right next door, actually, at a new place called Unit 6. So we'd love for you guys to come on out and enjoy some music with us. And if you're enjoying the show, make sure to like and subscribe, share with friends and family who you think may be interested as well. Anything else?
I don't know. Love your neighbor.
Love your neighbor.
Love yourself.
As you would love yourself. Yes, exactly.
Or if you're not capable of loving yourself and you love your neighbor more, love yourself as much as you love your neighbor. I don't know. Just love.
Learn to give yourself love without a reason.
Yeah.
Because You deserve it.
Yeah.
So be that wise elder being for yourself and understand that we're in the midst of this process. No one's supposed to be perfect yet. As long as we're endeavoring to grow forward, I think we're all right.
Mm-hmm.
All right, guys. Thank you so much for tuning in to this episode of Actuali Podcast. Love y'all.
Peace.
Talk to you soon.